All right. Welcome, everyone. Today, I'd like to introduce Darcy Thiel. I'm sorry, correct that. Darcy Thiel. Um, Darcy is a licensed mental health counselor, and she's here to talk to us about and share her insights on grief and loss. Darcy?
Hi, thanks, Lisa. I am super impressed with your site and all that you do to help people out there who are struggling with difficult situations. So it's really an honor to be able to do a recording with you. So thank you.
We're glad to have you. I think you have a lot to share with us.
Okay. So just a little bit, I guess, about my history. I am a licensed mental health counselor. I have a private practice in Western New York. But I am one of those people whose personal lives and experience has definitely shaped my career as much or more than my education. So I've been in practice for close to 30 years now, but I have also developed some other arms of my business because of the experiences that I had with both of my parents and my spouse. Back in 2007, my mother was diagnosed with colon cancer and died 3 weeks later. So it was a super short time period. It was a whirlwind. And I'm kind of an advocate by nature, and I tried to advocate for my mom. She had a really bad experience in the hospital, and I didn't realize at that time in my life that I was in training. I was about to learn a whole lot. You know, there was plenty of things that didn't feel right to me, but I'm still keep a good head on my shoulders when I'm in crisis. And so I just said, well, I'm not a doctor. So I just trusted the system. And that is probably the biggest lesson I learned, was that that's not necessarily the wisest path. You know, you have to choose your medical team very carefully, and sometimes it takes a long time to get the right medical team for yourself, for your loved one. And that if things don't seem right, you keep asking and you keep getting more opinions until you feel a little better about what's happening. My mom, as I said, had a rough time. Her doctor refused to allow a hospice referral until the last 4 hours of her life. But that was the only 4 hours during that 3-week period that she really was at peace and without pain. We had a beautiful kind of sacred, we knew it was coming thanks to the hospice medical staff, and all sat around her bed and watched her take her last breath. And 3 years later, my spouse, Tim, was diagnosed with gallbladder cancer, which is a very rare cancer. So rare, actually, that we had to facilitate our cancer hospital's research department communicating with our health insurance, because they kept saying, we can't cover this. There's got to be another site. Where did the cancer originate? And so we had to prove that there was such a thing as gallbladder cancer. And yeah, that was a special addition to all of the lovely things that happen when you get a terminal diagnosis.
You know, Darcy, I have a quick question for you. Because, you know, glioblastoma is also considered a rare disease. And sometimes I think that some of our members have also encountered that, well, it must have metastasized from somewhere, but I guess there's ways for them to differentiate. And so, of course, there's always this immediate rush to do treatment. And again, I mean, it's kind of the opposite of what you encountered. They wouldn't accept your diagnosis. So it's similar to your husband in many ways, it sounds like, but it was sudden. And
yeah, one of the hallmarks of gallbladder cancer is that there are no symptoms until you're stage 4. So he lived a perfectly normal life. I was the one with the pill box. And he never had to go to the doctor except for, you know, yearly physicals. And so he started having this, he called it a feeling, a sensation, you know, where his gallbladder was. And it wasn't even particularly painful. But he went in and they did tests and we thought he just needed his gallbladder out, which is a super common, simple procedure.
Right.
But we found out immediately that that wasn't what we were dealing with. So the problem with rare cancers is that there's not very much research done on them because in all fairness, if you're going to do research or try to work on treatment, you want to be effective for as many people as possible. So
Right.
The more common cancers get a lot more attention. But if you're also have a particular type of cancer that tends to be not detected until stage 4, there isn't much chance to do research.
Right.
So you can't really detect it early enough to get research. So it's kind of like a, you know, double whammy.
Right.
So yeah, it sounds like, you know, your folks kind of probably have some similar things. And I'm a pretty fierce advocate, so I think it probably only took 2 to 3 business days for me to get the information out there, but it literally became my full-time job, calling, being the squeaky wheel.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so the original prognosis was 1 to 2 years, which seemed so short. He was only 48 years old. We had a 7-year-old son, and but he ended up dying at 5 months after diagnosis. So your perspective changes really quickly. 1 to 2 years seemed very cruel, but that would have been an amazing amount of time considering we only had 5 months. But it was quite an experience for us. It really, besides the absolute upheaval that terminal illness, you know, turns your life chaotically upside down, it also was a pretty amazing experience for us. And we used the Caring Bridge website. I don't know if a lot of your folks are familiar with that, but back in 2010, I had not heard of it, and people were very insistent that I use it, and it did end up being quite a lifesaver for us. And that was when people started guest booking us and saying, you guys really need to make this a book, because we were becoming educated about gallbladder cancer in particular. And so as we learned, we put that information out. But we also were pretty open and honest about what our lives were like, how it affected us day to day. And so we ended up garnering some amazing support from people we didn't even know. And they set up a care calendar, which is another amazing resource your folks should know about, carecalendar.org. And so our church and our family and our community just rallied around us in a really beautiful way. You know, once we were fully in and knew what we were dealing with, we never cooked a meal again. And I had meals frozen for 6 months after he died. People cleaned our house, people did our shopping, people drove our 7-year-old around and took him places and, you know, tried to keep him busy and occupied, that kind of thing.
You know, Darcy, I have a question about that. Is that all from that care calendar that you just mentioned, that all those things happened?
I think that was the impetus. Yeah, I mean, that was the tool to make it a lot easier. I mean, people were reading the blog also, but the care calendar literally was a calendar, and you could put any need you wanted on it. You could put diet restrictions, you know, things people liked, not liked. And so everybody knew, oh, they just got lasagna on Monday, I'm not making it again for Wednesday. Right. And it would send out emails to the people to remind them. We would get an email saying, so-and-so's coming today to clean your house. it was quite a tool. So I think people helped in other ways too, but that really was the structure that helped make it what it was. And I wasn't even the administrator. Someone else offered to be the administrator. So all I had to do was tell her, you know, XYZ, and off she went and kind of made it happen. So, so a couple of years, you know, well, probably like a year after Tim died, I looked into writing the book like we had kind of thought about, and talked to a publishing lawyer, and then was like, no way. Mm-hmm. Writing a book is also something you have no idea about until you have to go through it. So, but then another year after that, I decided to tackle it and ended up writing 2 books about the experience. And it was really, once the title came to me, it was perfect. And I called it Bitter and Sweet, A Family's Journey with Cancer, because that's exactly what it was. You know, the bitter part is really, you don't have to explain that to people. They get that. But there were so many, it really transformed us also. My favorite example of the bitter and sweet, we certainly developed a sense of humor in our family about death, which can make people really uncomfortable. But the year my mom died, our family attended 17 funerals.
Wow, so, that's a lot.
I know. So I just took out stock and sympathy cards, and then with the experience that Tim and I had, Tim had a great sense of humor, and we went to pick out his burial plot. And we, you know, first had to pick the cemetery. So we drove around and looked at those things, and then decided on where it would be. And then we went to meet with the caretaker to look at the actual plots. And we were standing around, and the next thing I knew, Tim was laying on the ground doing one of these.
That's crazy.
I know. And I was like, okay, what do we got going on here?
Right.
He goes, well, I'm going to spend eternity here. I think I should check it out. And I'm like, all right, what do you think? You know, and I looked at the caretaker, and he was like, oh, I've seen much crazier. Don't even think twice about that. And I said, so what do you think? And he's like, yeah, it's okay. But, you know, I really need you to promise me something. And I'm expecting some profound, you know, make sure our son grows up knowing blah, blah, blah. And he said, I really want you to bury me with a word find book and a pencil.
Oh, wow.
Like, okay. He goes, well, you know, what if I wake up and it'd be boring? I'm like, and you think a word find book would be helpful? And he goes, yeah, pretty dark. I don't think lighting a match would be a good idea. I'm like, probably not. So I made this promise, a flashlight and a word find book and a pencil. And then I forgot about it. And the day of the wake, I was getting ready, and all of a sudden I let out the scream, and everyone came running. I'm like, we have to go to the store. And they were all like, seriously? I'm like, seriously? But you know, it was the epitome of bitter and sweet, because we got those things, and I just kind of typed out a little paragraph and put it in the cassette to explain why there were such things in there. And you know how wake goes, there's the casket and then the family, and people come up, and you know, they hug you and you cry, and they cry, and they're sniffling and sadness, and then they would go on to the casket, and I kind of would half consciously just wait for it, because I knew there was going to be a laugh. There was going to be a chuckle.
Because of the items in the casket, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and I just, there it was, bitter and sweet, literally standing next to each other, you know?
Right.
So after that, I started doing a little bit of lecturing and teaching about death and dying and patient advocacy, and was also taking care of my dad. He had Parkinson's disease, which is a very slow progressing disease. And, you know, when he was diagnosed, the doctor said, you know, you're not going to die from this. It's moves too slowly. So in one of my articles I just reread recently, I said, it's a very cruel disease that affects your organs and your brain and your body. But it's not kind enough to kill you. It just kind of keeps taking your life from you.
It's interesting because we see glioblastoma the same way. It affects your brain, your organs, and the treatment. All three are killing you, but not quick enough. In that same process. So that interesting parallel I had never thought of before.
Yeah, you know, all you have to look forward to is it getting worse.
Right.
And you know, like for my dad, he had issues with his gallbladder, and I'm sorry, that was a Freudian slip. He had issues with his bladder and some stuff with swallowing, and you know, enough to make your quality of life crummy, but not awful, you know, compared to what some people go through. Not awful, but you know, a decade goes by and it's unpleasant.
Right.
You know, I tend to do tangents, but we lost our dog this year, and the vet explained to me, you know, I don't think your dog is suffering, but she never feels well. And I thought that describes how my dad lived, you know.
Wow.
So, but while I was taking care of him, coupled with the education I now had from my mom and my spouse, I just kept getting more and more educated as his advocate and caregiver and person. I was his person, and developed this binder that was not anything profound. It just was extremely practical. And it had and I learned the hard way what to put in it. And it included everything. It was like my Bible. I was never without it, because it had all of his medical information, his doctor information, his medication information, his MOLST, his PULST, his proxy, all of that stuff, but then also his financial information and his end of life wishes. It was everything, and it was always with me. And so when I would go places with him, whether it was a bank or an appointment, you know, people would say, oh my gosh, that's such a great idea. And I was always very, very aware that while I was with my dad, there were rows and rows of rooms with people who had no one. There was no one there to advocate for them. There was no one there to fight for them or ask the right questions, that kind of thing. And so that became one of my passions, is how do I help other people go through these processes, because they just, and it's my personal opinion that our medical system, along with our mental health system, along with our legal system, our education system, pretty much everything is really broken. It's just terribly broken. And we are still teaching in medical school that death is a failure. Still, we are still doing that. And so that's a huge problem to begin with. And
so let me ask you then, what do you view death as?
Inevitable.
Okay.
Birth and death, those are the two equalizers. At least so far that I know of, no one's lived forever. And so it breaks every barrier. Doesn't matter what race you are, what economic status you are, what part in the world you live in. It's an absolute natural thing. And here in the US, we see it as something to avoid at all costs and to dread and to fear. And I think that's really harmful. And because of that, we're not aware of the choices that we have. So I think the medical system really is kind of a bully system. Only unfortunately, most of us don't know we're being bullied. Right. You know, we go in and they, whoever they are, say, okay, here's what's going on. This treatment didn't work. Here's what we do next. And we go, okay, that's just how it is. That's how it works.
Right.
We walk into a hospital and you get admitted and someone comes in and says, you know, this actually happened with Tim. I talked about this in my book. He got admitted for a few days into our cancer center, and we hear nothing, we hear nothing, we hear nothing. And then someone comes in and says, I have an antibiotic for Tim. And I'm like, oh, okay. Why? Because we don't know what's wrong. And she was like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, who ordered it? I don't know. Oh, okay. Could you, because nobody's been in to examine him, but somebody's writing orders for antibiotics. And I just want to know what's going on. I just want to be informed. And that's standard procedure. That's exactly what happens. You know, doctors write orders, not even seen. And what normally there's not an annoying family member asking questions. They just come in and say, here, take this. And you go, okay. And you take it.
Because you trust the system, because that's what we've been taught, right?
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
There are some instances that I know that many of us have experienced truthful doctors and others that won't tell us anything in the glioblastoma world. So, you know, I ask you that question, being one that I had a doctor that was truthful, because he said sometimes no treatment is the treatment. And it seems to be our instinct to fight without thinking about the consequences of the treatment and what it's going to do to us. And so, you know, for some, I guess I ask you that question because as a caregiver myself, I learned I didn't hear anything anybody was saying in those moments when they told us what the disease was, the diagnosis. And so I have to ask you that, because in those moments where you can't process that information, and you come back to it and then you sit with it, I mean, how do you make those good decisions as the advocate for the patient in that very moment?
Yeah, well, and so that's why the very first section of that book is a medical journal. And I recommend that everybody, whenever possible, you should never go to a doctor appointment alone.
Okay.
And I have my own journal for myself. I don't care what age you are.
Right.
You go, you listen, and you have somebody else take notes. And what happens is by the time you get home, you're shocked because you have forgotten 50% of what was said to you. If you hadn't
take notes, and we can't take notes fast enough. So then my thought, I have to ask, this is what I did in those moments, is I used my voice memo on my iPhone.
That's a great idea.
So that I could process the information later, because it was just, I couldn't keep, shorthand wasn't going to cut it.
Well, and some places won't let you use a recorder.
Gotcha. So we just sneak that in somehow.
Yeah. Well, and the idea too of having a written thing, like if you come home and listen to the recording to try and absorb that information, you then have that with you the next time to go, oh, but here on this date, we talked about this.
Right.
You know, and you also know, especially in a hospital setting, you know, when someone comes in, like I had a client that was in the hospital, and I went in and I happened to be there when whoever had come in, and they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to have PT come and take a look, and I'm going to whatever. And I would write every single thing down. And when the next person come in, I'd say, what's going on with this, 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 and this, and this.
Oh, wow.
You know, so that's why having that information is super important. And the thing is, not because people are bad, but because they're human. We're all better when we know someone's on us.
Right.
You know, when they know you're taking notes and you're educated, they're going to pay more attention. So that's how you get better care. That's how you get more efficient care, because they know. And how many times do you go on an appointment and they go, oh, when was that? When I go to the dentist, they're always like, when did you get those crowns? I'm like, you feel dumb because you're like, I don't know, it's my mouth. You'd think I'd know. But when you have everything journaled, you go, yeah, it was, you know, this time and this date. And we were really lucky. Our cancer center here sometimes has a reputation for being a little pushy because they're a research hospital. And they want people to do treatment and, you know, experimental groups and all of that. But we had a good experience there. There were two kinds of chemos for Tim's cancer, and you did chemo one until it didn't work anymore, and then you switched. And chemo one did not work at all. And so, knowing the questions to ask, we talked about chemo two. I asked what it was about, and his doctor was honest with me. She said, it's a lot more toxic. So the quality of life he has now will go down. He is going to be much sicker. And then I asked the question, how likely is it that, do you think it is that the chemo tool might work? And she said, honestly, looking at his history, it's probably not going to. Okay.
So you had an honest doctor then.
We had an honest doctor, and we were also at the same time reading these research articles on palliative care and how people that stop curative treatment live longer than people who stay in treatment, which is crazy. I found that to be shocking.
I think it's mostly a culmination of the treatment killing you versus the disease killing you, and getting to that point where you actually have a length of life without the toxicity of treatments. So
right, because the treatments themselves and you're kept comfortable. So you eat and you sleep, the very basics that you need, you know, to live. And so we talk about quality of life versus quantity of life. But then the ironic thing is when you do that, you actually can have a higher quantity of life too. You know,
right.
My dad went to palliative, and then when he was in the dying stages, we had a hard time getting hospice because they have criteria they have to meet. And then they're like, your dad's not losing weight. He gained 12 pounds. And I'm like, yeah, because he's palliative. That's what we say. Switch to palliative. You'll have a better life. So he's textbook case, but now he's almost being penalized because he went palliative, because now he doesn't meet the criteria of losing weight.
I see.
So it's a catch-22.
It's good to know.
But yeah. So all of the deaths were very, different. Tim ended up the last week of his life in hospice, which certainly wasn't the plan. He wanted to be home. But his sleep cycle got off. And so he went in to try to get that resolved, and just didn't make it back home. But he was not like my mom at all. My mom was the fairy tale death where we all knew and we sat around her bed, like I said. Tim would be okay. I am going to, you need to take that catheter out, because I'm going to go in the bathroom and go to the bathroom like a normal man. And then I'm ready. I'm going to come back and I'm going to get in bed and I'm ready. And I'm like, okay, so that's what we did. He goes into this deep sleep. Hospice is like, yeah, we think his body's shutting down. And 12 hours later, he wakes up and says, I think I want some soup and pudding. And I'm like, oh, not dying today, honey? And he's like, no, not today. I guess not.
Oh, geez.
And then he eventually, the last couple of days, wasn't communicative. And so there were lots and lots and lots of people that were in and out and gathering. And the intern had come in to check him, and she was giving me the update. His lungs are really clear. He's making some noises because of carbon dioxide, but there's really no change, you know, because they're experts. They know when to tell you. I went through that with my mom. So I had it all planned when they told me it was time. I knew what I was going to say to him. I don't remember it all now, but you know, stuff like go towards the light and don't worry about us. We're taken care of, you know, you can go. And so she had left and everybody scattered for lunch, and there were just a couple of us in the room chatting, and I happened to look over and Tim's eyes were wide open, and they hadn't been open for a couple of days. And I was like, oh my gosh, go get the nurse, whatever, you know. And everyone's like, he's fine, they just checked him. And I'm like, no, blah, you know. And so the nurse came in and was shocked because they had just checked him and he had died. And so later, and you know, what a fascinating experience, because I knew exactly what was coming. It was not a surprise. And I had been by his side as much as I could. I laid in bed with him there, you know, and yet they told me he was gone, and my knees literally bugged. My dad had to catch me because I almost fell. And then I was like, what? You know, you can prepare as much as you want, but you still go through that shock and surprise and all of that. So a few minutes later, everybody was standing around in a horseshoe, including, and the intern felt terrible because she felt like she missed it. And I'm like, you know, it's okay. But I looked up at her and I said, do you want to know what the last words to my husband were? And she said, sure. And I said, I leaned in and I whispered in his ear and said, you should have opened your eyes for that one. She's really hot.
Oh my. And he did, obviously.
I know. Later, about 6 months later, I was like processing it. I'm like, oh, he opened his eyes to see her.
Yeah. You know what? It sounds like we rehash as you go into the grief part of this, from a caregiver and into grief. You know, this is probably some of the things that you talk about in your book as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know,
and so if you had a few words you could say to our members that, you know, will be in that space at some point in time, what would you say?
About afterwards and processing?
Yeah.
My tagline became embrace it all.
Okay.
You know, I do a lot of grief counseling, and, you know, our instinct, which makes sense, is to push pain away.
Mm-hmm.
If we're anxious, we try not to be anxious. If we're depressed, we try not to be depressed. If we're grief stricken, it feels awful, so we try and get rid of it. We try and distract ourselves if we can. And I am just a huge believer in embrace it.
I've heard that as well. I have. I've heard that, you know, ride the wave, let it be. If you don't, it will come back twice as bad.
Yeah, I think you know, it's part of living a full and rich life. You know, without death, there isn't life. Without sadness, and if we're happy all the time, there would be no happy, because we have to have sad to know what happy is. If we really think about it, if we lived forever, there wouldn't be any meaning to life. I mean, what gives meaning to life is that it's not forever. And so we have to grow and change and have relationships and love and all of those things, because if we just live forever, who would care about anything?
I see.
And so I think those are just again, things that I feel like I've just learned along the way. So embrace it. Okay, this moment or this day or this afternoon or this next 10 seconds, it hurts like hell, but I'm here and I'm going to sit in it and I'm going to stay with it. And you embrace it.
Got it. So caregivers have a lot going on. They have a lot going on. And, you know, as I think about your story and the experiences that you've shared, we all have unique ones based on our relationship. However, I think that caregivers don't get the guidance or the tools. You're just kind of thrown into it, for lack of a better description.
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier when you were talking. You know, there was a pivotal moment in my life, and that was when I was in the waiting room at the hospital for them to suck Tim's gallbladder out through his belly button. It's this simple thing, you know, and they're like, we'll do it on a Friday so we can go back to work on Monday. And 20 minutes into surgery, out comes the doctor and takes me into this room and closes the door for privacy. And he has color photographs of Tim's gallbladder. And he's explaining, and this is why you've got to have the team you can trust. I knew he was an excellent surgeon. And he's, you know, trying to explain to me, see, this is concerning, and this isn't supposed to be here. And, you know, instead of being an organ that can be sucked out, his is very hard. So it's like, if you can imagine taking a pair of tweezers and going against a wall. That is what it is like. I can't do it that way. So I have to either open him up the way we traditionally used to and take it out, or I have to biopsy it and be sure of what we're dealing with. What would you like me to do? I'm a counselor. Yeah. I have no medical, that was the moment my life changed, because I had no competence, no education. I had to make a decision in the moment. And I had no idea that was the first of thousands of decisions we were going to make in the next 5 months, you know? And so my instinct was, well, if it's that awful, get it out of him.
Right.
But what I had learned was to ask the question we ask our vets. What would you do if it was your dog? And I just said, Dr. Patterson, what would you do if this was your wife? And he said, I would absolutely biopsy and pull out. I'm like, okay, I trust you, because I chose our team carefully, and that's what we did. And, you know, we were told later at the cancer hospital, boy, are you lucky you had the surgeon you did, because surgeons like to cut.
Right.
And had he done that, it would have been a much longer recovery period, and they couldn't have even started treatments. So who knows what our 5 months might have been, and maybe it'd have been 4 months or 3 months, you know? And so, but that's exactly what all of a sudden, you are thrown into a totally different world.
Right.
And it is,
did you seek a second opinion, or you had done the research first on this doctor?
So they always kind of recommend a second opinion. I certainly would. My neighbor knew the surgeon that we knew at the cancer hospital at our first appointment. And so, you know, people who, okay, he's really good. He's one of the best. Okay, so we had his opinion, which was, you've got 5 to 7 months to live. But I still didn't know if we should go to like Cleveland Clinic or someplace else. But the surgeon in chief of the cancer hospital happened to go to my church. I didn't know him, but my minister did. And so he agreed to look at all of the reports and the tests.
So you did get a second opinion. Got it.
Yeah, in the same facility, but that didn't matter to me as much as I trusted my minister and my minister trusted him. You know what I mean?
Like, right. So as a caregiver in these situations, it seems like when we're all of a sudden forced into making these decisions with no medical knowledge. And I do know we have a number of nurses who also, because it's a rare disease, they don't know how to respond to it. Even in the medical system, they don't know until you get there. And so making good decisions is key to the survival of your person that you're caring for, whether it's a parent, a spouse, a child. So those are really important things, I think, in caregiving that you talk about. Being able to make good choices, knowing that you're doing the best you can with what you have, and knowing when to ask questions and keeping track of everything. I think all of those are critical components. I know for me, because I'm in records management, I actually had a thumb drive. The only thing I couldn't put on there was MRIs, but I had a thumb drive with all records. And I was that crazy lady when I didn't get what I wanted. That doesn't always work, the squeaky wheel, but I just said, I don't want to be that person, but if you don't work with me on it, then this is how we're going to be. But I think that, learning to navigate through portals, learning to navigate the healthcare system, learning to navigate your insurance, and having all that information in a single location so you have a single source of the truth, kind of like records that we deal with all the time. Those were the things that I think are critical for caregivers to survive a rare disease diagnosis and manage all of that. I think you've really given us some really good information here about the caringbridge.org, and then you had a calendar one. What was that website?
Care Calendar.
Care Calendar.
I think it's .org as well.
Okay.
That's a really good resource. Yeah,
huge
ginormous.
Resources. It's really hard to ask for help when you're in the midst of the battle because your focus is only in one location. So that's a great thing that you brought up that I had never heard of. I had to get somebody to put a manual calendar for certain things for us, but yeah, that was definitely.
So in the program that I recently just put together, that's the very first training module, has CaringBridge and Care Calendar in it. Like, you need to know this first, then we're going to talk about all this other stuff, but you might immediately need this kind of help.
Got it. I think about it as a mental health counselor. I can't imagine having to report to everybody over and over and over again the same information. And then so you're reliving it. And so that probably was very helpful mentally to communicate. So is there a cost for CaringBridge?
No, at least there wasn't when I used it. No, you can make donations to them.
Okay, got it.
So, which they were wonderful when I decided to put the book together. They provided everything for me in a doc format so that because both of my books were journals, the entries in real time. So, and you really don't, I just reread my books 2 summers ago, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even remember that way, and it's really startling how much things get mixed up in our heads, especially when they're emotional.
That's really actually key for us as a caregiver. What we think we heard isn't really what was said. Yeah.
Well, anyone really, but definitely caregivers. And, I have heard it said, and you have to, you can't say it to all audiences, but I think even my husband would have said this, that it's almost harder on the caregivers than the patient themselves.
Yeah.
And, and my husband would always say, our family has cancer, because every one of us was so profoundly affected, and so I'm really excited about the program I've developed, because it's called the Resilient Caregivers Lifeline, and every single one of those words I chose very carefully, because caregivers are resilient, amazing human beings, but they're drowning.
They are. most definitely between the fight and the care and the medical community and the other family dynamics that play into it. It all,
oh yeah,
definitely gets
siblings,
crazy.
Relatives.
Yeah, everybody doesn't know what's really going on. So yeah, I understand.
And sometimes conflict with the patient, you know, with your loved one. And so my passion is to really offer these resources to make a difference for people so that they can have better experiences.
So Darcy, why don't you tell us what the name of the website is? I mean, I would expect some people might have questions about this book that you have or other things that you offer. So
yeah, so actually probably the easiest place is my website, which is darcythiel.com, DARCYTHIEL, and that kind of has links to different things. My books and my practice and those kinds of things. The Resilient Caregivers Lifeline does not have its own site. What I am doing is offering for the next couple of weeks a free 15-minute either phone call or Zoom to answer any questions there are. I think that a website doesn't do it justice. It's such a personal journey to go on as a caregiver. And so I really want to have that personal connection to find out where people are at, to let them know how specifically the program can help them.
Okay, so if they wanted to reach out to you, our members, they would email you, or is your email on the website? Is that the best way to reach you, or how would you want them to do it? And is there something they should reference so that they know that they're getting the free 15 minutes with you?
So I think, we're going to work on getting it on your site, but it really doesn't matter to me. You can email me at darcythiel@gmail.com. My phone number is going to be on that, which is 716-912-8448. You can call me, you can text me, however you want to get a hold of me. And then you can just say, I saw you on, in
glioblastoma support. Yeah. On the glioblastoma support network. So they could reference you with, I saw you on GSN, so that you could find out, know where those individuals are coming from. So that's great. I really appreciate your taking time with us, and I look forward to doing a couple of more videos with you. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we sign off?
No, just hang in there.
Got it.
I know you know about this site, so you already know this, but you're not alone.
Absolutely.
And you're amazing.
Well said. Well said. Thank you, Darcy.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Lisa.